Again, welcome everyone to this month's, well, actually it was last month's Jyotish journey. And the focus is going to be on the article I distributed, which is the first part of a two-part article having to do with the quantitative measures that we find within Jyotish, Prashra to be specific, for assessing Graha Bala. And of course, Graha Bala is a very, very important issue. Bala means strength, and obviously when we're looking at the issue of strength, it's how strongly a planet can give its effects. But I want to start out by saying it's very important to understand that strength, don't confuse strength with influence. Don't confuse strength with the kind of effect that the planet gives. Strength is merely a question of how strongly a planet will give its results, whether that result be favorable, unfavorable, or mixed. Okay. Now, that said, typically, if some karaka, some planetary karaka has good sources of strength, then it becomes more empowered to give the results of its karaka significations, typically, usually in a more favorable way, unless, of course, it's very, very afflicted. But the way in which Graha Bala really is so important, as I brought out in the article, is when assessing a particular Mahadasha Lord and the kind of results it could give, and in particularly in terms of any yogas in which it might participate. You know, as one of my friends joke, I'm kind of Mr. Yoga. I really emphasize yogas. In Jyotish, I describe them as being the essence of the system, which I believe they are. And, you know, it's so critical to be able to identify yogas in a chart, but then identifying is only the first step. Obviously, you've all heard me say that the really important step is to qualify them. And part of that qualification is to see how strongly they're going to give us their results. Again, whether they're a favorable yoga and unfavorable yoga. And that is a question of planetary strength. And then, you know, you all are fairly advanced students, and therefore you know different sources of strength that I've emphasized over and over again, both in my articles and in these webinars. But then there exists within this system a more sort of systematic, you might say, a more thorough and complete way to look at that question that then actually is quantitative as well. That is, you get some quantitative measure of that. But if you've read the article, I've also emphasized that you have to be careful with this and not just to try to totally rely on it, because if you do, you could also go wrong. And so the first part of the lesson was on this thing called Vimshapaka Bala, 20-point strength, that gets derived from the different placements by dignity that a planet may fall in the different vargas. And you saw that there's different groupage, Shadvarga, Saptavarga, Dasavarga, and Shodavarga, which has to do with all 16 divisions, and it's not really clear to me why, but if you see Parashara, if you see Paladipika, what seems to be emphasized and being used is the Dasa Varga scheme. And then within that Dasa Varga scheme, I've asked you to understand that within those 10 divisions that are used in the Dasa Varga scheme, the 4 that are given the greatest weight by far are number 1, the Rashi. And who remembers the other ones, rather than me just talking here? Who remembers the other ones that really get emphasized?
Navamsha.
Navamsha, always, very important. What else?
Shashtyansha.
And surprisingly, you know, it's not one, maybe not surprising, but Shashtyansha. And again, you know, most reasonably accurate birth times are going to give correct placement of planets in Shashtyansha insofar as their signs. Now, whether you're having a correct Shashtyansha Lagna, which is very sensitive to even minor inaccuracies in the birth time, is a question mark for our purposes here, though it's not actually important. And then another division that seems to be given a lot of weight in the Dasa Varga scheme?
Drakana,
right? Drakana. So one quick and dirty method that some of you who have read my article, Intricate Patterns of Destiny, know that I emphasize for kind of, you know, assessing on a more detailed way the kind of strength of a planet is just to see its dignity in those 4 divisions, right? But, you know, our programs give us this information, both in terms of how many points out of 20 a planet achieves, in terms of the Vimshapaka, but then, I showed you screenshots in my program, Sri Jyotish Star, that'll graphically give you this at a glance, which of course is a very, very useful thing to have. And so, it's worthwhile looking at, okay? And especially if something pops out at you as having a particularly good Vimshapaka or weakness that way, right? But it's not the whole story, as I was emphasizing towards the end of the article, because it doesn't take into account things such as Vargotama, planets being in an exchange, planets getting directional strength, or planets that, say, are in debilitation but have strong factors of cancellation, such as being involved in an exchange. Right? So this is why I've said that we just can't rely on this entirely if we're assessing the kind of strength a planet can give its results in. Is there any questions about any of that before we go on and start looking at charts?
Mark, two questions. The first question, when you say Karakas, it is just natural Karakas you're talking about, or both Gemini Karakas?
No, just, it's fixed, Sthira-Karakas, just fixed indicators, right?
Okay.
So, Mars has its, indication, or let's say Mercury, which is, planet of communication, has to do with writing, right? It has to do with analytical thinking and all that sort of thing, right? So, typically, if a planet has a good Vimshapaka, all those natural significations of Mercury are going to express themselves strongly. Now, how favorably they express themselves is going to be more of a function of other additional factors, where it's placed by house, the different planetary associations it might have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is it clear?
Yes, Mark, perfect. The second question is, so in your article, like I saw a table where it showed the Vimshapaka score, the table, the software showed it. But that score did not match any of the Varga. Is it an average of all the 4 Vargas?
No, it's Dasa Varga. It's Dasa Varga. That screen that shows a particular score, and just that score is the Dasa Varga total for Vimshapaka. Remember, each of those groups adds to 20 points.
Correct.
And there'll be different scores for each of those groups. The one that's being emphasized is the Dasa Varga 10 divisions. Clear?
Okay, so one you see in the table is nothing but Dasha Varga score.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, different programs can give you the score for each of them.
Yeah, my program, I'm using Parashara Light. It didn't give me a score, any of the score which is in the Dasha Varga or Shad Varga, because it gave me a score something like an average. That's why I'm asking.
Well, okay. Anyway, we don't want to get hung up on what a particular program gives, but again, the classics are emphasizing the Dasa Varga scheme. Right, so I'm going to bring up a chart here. And actually, those of you who are following exercises that I post in the Gemini Closed Facebook group in the birth chart, no, I actually, take that back. That comes later. Everyone can see this chart, yes? Roberto, please verify that you're looking at a chart with Sagittarius Lagna, yes?
That's right, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And this woman will be a mystery woman for the moment, but she is a name that if you live in the U.S., at least, you're going to recognize. And since the early part of 2016, she's been very much in the news and on the news quite a bit, right, or on news programs. So take a look at this chart. And just in terms of always, how we start out looking at distinctive features of the chart. And this could be anything about it. It could be a typical condition of a planet and or yogas, anything.
Ascendant Lord is exalted in the 8th house.
So the Lagna Lord Jupiter goes to the 8th house in its exaltation sign. And what's particularly notable about it, if anything?
Very close to its exaltation point.
So when seeing a planet in its exaltation sign, one of the things that I've invited you to do is to see how exalted it is. And Roberto's recognizing that the Jupiter has its deep exaltation at 5 degrees, which it's passed here. But what here? What's that underline in the
retrograde.
Right? So it's moving back towards its highest degree of exaltation. Right?
It's approaching.
So we would call this an extremely exalted Jupiter as the Lagna Lord, but in the 8th house. What else? Any other notable feature here? Maybe in continuing involving this Jupiter?
Is this lady earning, yeah, I guess it's a female. Is she earning her livelihood through speaking on television or appearing on television?
Well, Rohit, you've made a very good astrological deduction. If we were in a classroom setting, I'd probably be rewarding that with the first chocolate, should you want it. Right? So very good for you. She certainly makes her living speaking. Okay. And she's been on television speaking a lot. So that was an accurate deduction. Why don't you share why don't you enlighten the rest of us as how you arrived at that conclusion?
Well, the 2nd house is the house of speech. The 10th Lord, Mercury, is in the 2nd house, forming a good Raj Yoga. It's a 9-10 Raj Yoga there, and all the benefics are aspecting onto that 2nd house. So the 2-10 combination along with the benefics there, I think that's the simple thing.
Gets pretty energized, that 2nd house, does it not?
Absolutely. And then Mercury being the planet of,
right.
Yeah.
But since you mentioned, another distinctive feature of this chart, which is the 9-10 Raja Yoga, how would we qualify that yoga?
Well,
what's maybe favorable about it? In any way, does it in any way deteriorate?
Sun.
It has the aspect of 2 benefics.
Yeah, I mean.
So first of all, it's with 2 additional benefics, one of whom is the Lagna Lord, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just a 9-10 combination; it's a 1-9 and a 1-10 combination additionally, right?
Yeah.
So now we've got the 1st Lord, the 9th Lord, and the 10th Lord all involved. So it becomes a bit more dramatic. That's the good side. Is there any way in which the yoga we'd have to sort of qualify it a little bit in the not?
Well, Mercury, one of the planets involved in it is, it's debilitated in the 8th house in the Navamsha. And I don't think it's in an exchange. So that kind of loses a little bit of its luster there.
So good. Basically you're doing what Vimshapaka Bala wants you to do, which is to not just see a planet in the Rashi, but to see a planet in many divisions, and some more important than others, one of which is being Navamsha, which is one of the reasons I'm showing you this example, because Mercury does have weakness in the Navamsha. And, you might say there are some factors for cancellation, because its Lord in the Navamsha goes into an angle, both from the birth chart and from the moon. So, but it's not involved in exchange. It's not with an exalted planet. It's not getting aspected by its sign Lord. It's not involved in these things that I refer to as the most effective cancellation, right? Does anybody see anything else that makes this 9-10 Raja Yoga deteriorate a little bit?
Sun is not particularly in a strong position, either in the D1 or the D9 chart.
All right, so these dignities of the planets, it's not like this 9-10 combination is falling in the 9th or the 10th, right?
Right.
But there's something else here, folks, that seems to be fairly obvious.
Saturn and Mars are both afflicting the 10th house. So
yeah,
the 10th house has got the influence of the 2 malefics.
It does, in which case when we consider 10th house matters, we must take that into account. It doesn't necessarily, and so it qualifies the 10th house, Peter, doesn't necessarily qualify that 9-10 Raja Yoga.
Okay.
I'm looking for another qualification of that 9-10 Raja Yoga on the unfavorable side.
Is it combust, Mark?
Why wouldn't it be?
That's right.
It's very close to sun.
Yes. And, you know, even if you're kind of exploring and researching and experimenting with the idea of cazimi, as I am, it's, you know, not within a degree of the sun. It's outside of that. And so you have to consider this as being combust here. Right? You know, because otherwise, these are pretty powerful Raja Yoga combinations, are they not?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's running, and let me just say that this individual's running the major period of Jupiter, and as of early 2016, she's running the sub-period of Mercury. So in other words, any yogas that these planets form are being activated in the dasha sequence, right? In the dasha sequence, and so you know, it's relevant to be looking at and qualifying this yoga here. Still going to give Raja Yoga, right? But then, you know, we have to take into account what quality and level of Raja Yoga, which the fact that Mercury here has some weakness in Navamsha, the fact that it's also combust, you know, we have to, you know, take that into account. Now, you know, before we go any further, I want to say something about Jupiter as the Lagna Lord for Sagittarius falling in the 8th. Normally, as we know, not a particularly good placement for the Lagna Lord. If there's additional malefic influence on the Lagna Lord or the Lagna, then you start to get into the Arishta Yoga area, right? But you know, it's a little bit different for Sagittarius because of the way in which Jupiter actually goes into its exaltation sign here. And you haven't found it to be much of a problem unless there's severe afflictions, right? When a person runs that particular period. Is there any additional malefic influence onto Jupiter here?
There's the Mars affliction onto the Lagna, but
I started with the Lagna Lord, Rohit. Is there any additional influence on the Lagna Lord here?
Mild malefic sun, maybe, but nothing else.
yeah.
Right. But, as you noted, both Saturn and Mars aspect the Lagna. So, you know, Jupiter, Saturn, which I think she ran already, but Jupiter, Mars coming up, you know, it's going to potentially activate some Arishta potential. Right? But the 8th house will be emphasized. The 8th house will be emphasized, very much so. But is there any other, and we'll come to that in a moment, is there any other yoga that Jupiter, of note, that Jupiter's involved in here that we should maybe be making note of?
Kesari Yoga.
Kesari Yoga. Why Kesari Yoga?
It's an angle from the moon.
Mm-hmm. It's an angle from the moon, but not an angle from the birth lagna, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's why we'll call it Kesari Yoga. But again, Jupiter's got the influence of 2 additional natural benefics, and it's falling in Angra from the moon here, fourth from the moon. And, you know, Kesari yogas, or Gaja Kesari yogas, where Jupiter is in Cancer, are particularly good. Why, other than the fact that Jupiter's in its exaltation? Or can be particularly of note.
Because the moon is the dispositor.
Because the moon's the dispositor, right? So now we add to this picture Kesari Yoga. So the fact that this person would become significant in some way in their Jupiter Mahadasha is certainly pretty readily seen, right? But now if you look on the table below, I'm showing you a table that is just showing you the different sign placements and therefore the dignity of both Jupiter and Mercury, right? And that, you know, you'll see here that we've already seen that Jupiter is exalted in the birth chart, but you'll see that it's also exalted in the Drekana, okay? Its Navamsha condition is unremarkable. It's in the sign of a neutral, but you'll see that Jupiter is also exalted in the Shastyamsha. Does everybody see that?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So three out of those four divisions that are given the most weight, it's exalted. So if one did sort of a quick view of that when you were evaluating her Jupiter Mahadasha, you'd have to see, number one, that Jupiter has some juice, right? Has some real strength. And then it's involved in these yogas. Raja Yoga, Dana Yoga, Kesari Yoga. So pretty predictable that, she's going to get known, rise up, it becomes significant. And then, there are going to certain subperiods that are going to bring that out. And of course, Mercury subperiod, she runs Jupiter, right? And then she runs Jupiter-Saturn, but then now Jupiter-Mercury. And so this period, raising her up, would certainly give that indication. And then if I show you the Shamsha here, what might then solidify that idea in terms of a particular subperiod?
Well, the fact that they're an aspect in the Dashamsha, they're a mutual glance.
Sambandha, right? This
Yeah.
idea, the Sambandha. Does anybody have any idea who this is? Think Donald Trump.
Is it his wife?
Nope.
Daughter?
It must be his daughter.
Kelly Ann Conway.
Oh my word!
Kelly Ann Conway.
Wow.
Who ever heard of Kelly Ann Conway before 2016?
Yeah.
No one. But then she became Trump's campaign manager and chief apologist, right? And spin master.
Mm.
Spin master. And of course now, she was the first female campaign manager that ever got a man elected or helped to get a man elected. And then, of course, she's become special advisor to Trump, spends a lot of time in the White House, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and spends an enormous amount of time, as people know, on news shows, usually defending Trump with her own version of reality, which mirrors Donald Trump's own version of reality, which is not reality at all. But, it's sort of interesting to consider. Of course, I'm expressing my own views here. Excuse me for that. But it's interesting to consider this period and subperiod that has made her kind of a household name, at least in the U.S. And really the subject of a lot of lampoon as well. If anybody watches Saturday Night Live, they've done a lot of she's become good material for them, as has Donald Trump. Now, I'm going to show you the screenshots here. And, you can see the Vimshapaka Bala in the different groupages here. And, Jupiter here, the Mahadasha Lord, it's okay. It's not, it's certainly above 10, so we're moving towards, but, and in the Dasavarga scheme, it's 13. All right, starting to get up there, but it's not what I would call, really dramatic. But you have to see those three divisions that carry the most weight in which it's becoming exalted. Right? Now, interestingly enough, because we saw that weakness of Mercury in Navamsha, we get a little different picture when we see it in the 10 divisional scheme and then in the 16 divisional scheme, right? See how Mercury moves up to having 14 out of 20 points, where it's starting to become significantly strong. And remember, it's in this major period of Jupiter, sub-period of Mercury, that all this has been, this great fame or great becomes significance has been happening. And if you just judge just on Rashi and Navamsha, you wouldn't see that strength of Mercury, right?
Right.
This is why, in my opinion, it becomes important to look at these things. Comments, questions?
Mark, is there any supporting factors for Mercury in Navamsha?
Well, it has some level of cancellation. It's in its debilitation sign. We'll go back and look at that here. You see Mercury's in Pisces. Pretty afflicted. But Jupiter, its Lord, dispositor, is in the Lagna, right? So it's angular from the Lagna. It's also angular from the Moon. And these are factors for cancellation. This is why I say some level. Right? But again, just looking at Mercury's dignity or situation in the birth chart and then seeing the Navamsha, if you're just judging based on that alone, you wouldn't see it having much juice. But if you look in a more extensive way through this, Vimshapaka Bala in Dasavarga, then it improves considerably, right?
That's perfect.
Can I ask you just a general question about the importance of the 4 divisions in the Dasavarga? I'm curious about why, for example, the Draconel is considered to be an important division and not, say, the Dashamsha, which I personally would have thought would have been more significant.
Well, remember the Dashamsha is in the Dasavarga scheme.
Mm-hmm.
The Shamsha is in it's included in that. So, there is that. And I have a very simple and clear answer to that. I don't know.
I was waiting for that. Thanks.
There may be some logic behind it. It may be what I jokingly refer to as a rishi thing, meaning it is so because the rishis said it was so.
Right. Yeah.
But as to some rationale, which is what you're looking for, I don't know.
Okay, thank you for that.
But Mark, hasn't Kane Rao in some of his books mentioned about like the real dignity of the planet to be checked in the D3 chart?
Well, yeah, but always basically what he's saying by that is basically what we're saying here. But he hasn't said why.
Right.
That's what Peter wants to know. He wants to know why.
Oh, I was always saying that at school. Yeah, why?
It's important to know that a position in D3 is very important to look at as far as this idea, and this is acknowledged by the kind of greater weight that it carries than others in the scheme of 10 and 16.
Mm-hmm.
Why that be the case, I don't know, and I've never come across any explanation.
Okay.
I don't even know that it's important to know why. It's important to know that it is.
Right.
Other thoughts here, questions or comments before we move on? Okay. So, but it's also important to see the Shamshi here because, this principle many of you know that I swear by, that, period and subperiod of 2 planets Sambandha in D10 are likely to prove significant in terms of developments in a person's career life, particularly if there's a promise in the birth chart, which of course there most certainly is. Okay. So now I'm going to show you another chart here, and this man shall remain a mystery for the moment, but those of you who are participating in the Jyotish the Jaimini close Facebook group will maybe recognize this birth chart because it's the mystery man that I posted for last week's exercise. But now, and that was from the Jaimini angle, but we're going to be looking at it now from the Parashari angle only. And again, coming back to what do you see as notable features here, distinctive features for this chart? Mm-hmm.
Fifth Lord in the ascendant, benefic Venus rising.
So the Lagna Lord, the Lagna has Venus as a natural benefic as the 5th Lord in the Lagna, giving what kind of yoga?
A 1-5 Raj Yoga.
1-5 Raj Yoga by placement.
Yeah.
Always a good thing to have a natural benefic in the Lagna. And what would be its dignity here? Can anybody tell me offhand? You can consult the table, but I'd rather you be able to do it mentally. It's in the sign of a great friend. Venus and Mercury are friends. Naturally, Mercury, one sign away, makes a temporary friend. Together, the compound relationship is that of a great friend. Okay? So we have a natural benefic and the sign of a great friend as the fifth lord in the first, giving Raja Yoga. And actually what kind of planet it is, and the fact that it's in Gemini is quite significant is in terms of who you'll find out that this person is. Now, what else? Distinctive features?
Very strong Lagna Lord because of the benefic hemming on both sides of it. And, Venus, a benefic in the Lagna. So it's the foundation is pretty strong in this chart here.
It is. Now, it's not exclusively benefic hemming because the sun is there, right?
Right.
But I'll go with you that I believe this Lagna does get benefically hemmed, and therefore it boosts up the Lagna and the planet in it, which of course is Venus. And, you've got this fact going on. So, all right, I would consider that also a distinctive feature. What else? It's an interesting horoscope from a lot of different standpoints. So let's go on here.
The moon is interesting for me because it's exalted, and it achieves a certain amount of benefic hemming with the Venus Jupiter on either side, even though we have K2 there too as well.
It's a very significant feature of this horoscope, Peter. First of all, because it is in its exaltation sign, but then, where does it go to Navamsha?
Into its own sign.
Swakshetra. So
Right.
It's exalted in the birth chart. It's Swakshetra in Navamsha. Not a bright moon, but it has these conditions. And then you've noticed this nice hemming on either side, which in this case, K2 doesn't really matter here, right? It's Chayagraha, right? And what kind of yoga does this form? There's those of you who took my yoga program should recognize a particular yoga here.
Benefic Durudara Yoga.
Shubha Durudara Yoga.
Yeah.
The moon is a strong moon is hemmed by benefics. Now let's think about this. What house does the moon rule?
The second
house. And then what do you see happening in the second house? Here, yoga wise.
Buddhiti Yoga.
Why is it Buddha
Right.
Ditya? Why is it Buddha Ditya Yoga? Why is it Buddha Ditya Yoga?
Because it involves the Lagna Lord.
Because it involves the Lagna Lord here. It could involve the fifth house, fifth Lord as well, right? But it involves but actually, in a way, by disposition, the fifth house, fifth Lord is involved. But we have a combination of Mercury, the Lagna Lord here, in the second house with Sun. And is there any combustion?
No.
No question of combustion. It's a good Buddha Ditya Yoga. And think about what underlies this good Buddha Ditya Yoga, which means let's look at the landlord, the dispositor moon, all of which we just said, right?
Right.
So now think about this. Gemini Lagna, right? Venus in Gemini Lagna, and then you have this moon in the sign of a benefic, surrounded by benefics, and the Buddha Ditya Yoga involving the Lagna Lord in the second house with the third Lord.
This is a performer, a singer or a storyteller of some kind.
Well, you're on the right track with the storytelling. Right? You're on the right track with the storytelling. Now, when it comes to the written form, and it involves Venus, what literary form could that produce? The written word.
Poetry.
This is the chart of the British poet laureate Alfred Lord Tennyson.
Wow.
This is the chart of the British poet laureate Alfred Lord Tennyson. Now, just for a moment, for fun, we're going to switch over to the Jaimini system because I know most of you know Jaimini. And in the Jaimini Sutras, there's a specific combination for producing an author, many of whom that you've seen me talk about that. We've looked at examples, but there's a specific combination given for a person becoming a poet. The combination for a person becoming a poet, and it's talking about who's the planet of poetry. Who do you think the planet of poetry is? Planet of poetry, Venus. And it says, if Venus is in the 5th house from Karakamsha and or Swamsha Lagna, it can be either, then the person will become a poet. Of course, if the Karakamsha Lagna or the 5th from house, that either in the birth chart or in the Navamsha has the influence of the moon, Jupiter, and other natural benefics, this is what makes a successful author. So now think about who is the Atmakaraka here?
Moon.
Moon.
Where does the moon go in Navamsha?
Cancer.
What influences are on the moon in the Lagna of Swamsha?
Venus, moon.
Well, the moon, use Cancer as the Lagna, right?
Right.
And the influences on it are Jupiter and Venus.
Right.
Venus falls in the 5th house from Swamsha Lagna, getting the aspect of this Swakshetra moon. You see?
Yes.
Even from the birth Lagna, I mean, even using Karakamsha in the birth chart, you have Mercury in the Karakamsha Lagna aspected by that exalted moon, right?
Yes.
So now what's interesting, and one of the reasons I'm wanting to discuss this chart, is that the period and subperiod when he became England's poet laureate, which was the year 1850. And it was the major period, very momentous year for him for a lot of reasons. And it was in the major period of Jupiter, sub-period of Mars. I'm sorry, Rahu. Major period of Jupiter, sub-period of Rahu. Now, why would Jupiter major period, you don't get elected poet laureate. It's an honor that gets conferred upon you, right? And so what house would we be thinking of for something like that?
11th.
The 11th.
Mm-hmm.
11th house, obviously. So the most obvious reason why something like this could happen in the Jupiter major period is it's the 10th Lord in the 11th, right? But is it forming any, aside from that, is it forming any yogas of note?
Yeah. If you consider 11th house, it forms Saraswati Yoga.
Sorry?
No, if you consider 11th, it forms Saraswati Yoga.
Vijay, did someone teach you that?
No.
So what Vijay is referring to is that I once was surprised when K.N. Rao was discussing the chart of David Frawley, this very famous Vedic scholar that many of you know about. And he was talking about the Saraswati Yoga in his chart. And I'm looking at the chart and said, how is this Saraswati Yoga? Because David has Jupiter in the 5th house, Aquarius, but then he has Mercury and Venus in the 11th house, right? Then I discovered that K.N. Rao, and then I've seen B.V. Raman doing the same thing. They utilize the 11th house when seeing Saraswati Yoga as well. And so, from that standpoint, Vijay sees that with Venus in the Lagna, with Mercury in the 2nd house, and now with Jupiter in the 11th, it's Saraswati Yoga. So he becomes he's a poet to begin with. That's one of the reasons, lots of reasons. But then, in the period of the 10th Lord in the 11th house, as a component of this Saraswati Yoga, he becomes poet laureate. Right? But now, that's a status, right? That's a very high status. So how could a very high status be seen in the Jupiter major period? I'll give you a hint. You have to use alternative lagnas.
Okay. Well, from Dasha Lagna, Capricorn is on the 10th cusp and is therefore ruled by Saturn.
Well, you're on the right track. Your Dasha Lagna is, a big part of that answer. But what happens to Jupiter from Dasha Lagna? Anyone?
Jupiter becomes the ninth lord
In which house?
in the first house.
And who's it in a mutual glance with?
With Mars, the first is the 1-9 Raj Yoga.
Folks, from Aries, the combination of Jupiter and Mars forms a very superior Raja Yoga. Right? It's the combination of the Lagna Lord with the ninth Lord along the 1-7 axis from this perspective, from Dasha Lagna. Right? Again, I'll emphasize the importance of Dasha Lagna. So he becomes, and of course, Rahu was given the results of Mars. And he was very successful one of the reasons he became poet laureate in Jupiter Rahu was because of the poetry he was writing and publishing in Jupiter Mars. Okay? So we see this. But does anybody see any other potential of Jupiter Rahu based on a totally different sort of consideration and idea? Jupiter Rahu, what other results could give, although Dasha Lagna is something that you have to be utilizing here as well.
Scandalous relationship.
Well, first of all, why do you say relationship, and then why do you say scandalous?
In the 7th house from Jupiter with another malefic, Mars. And it's happening in the 5th house of relationships from the birth Lagna. Right. Jupiter then becomes the 7th lord, so putting everything together kind of.
And if I told you he was running his Libra period in Charadasha at the time?
Well, then that would, again, it's the 5th house of relationships.
No, well, just use Libra as a Lagna, find the dark Karaka here.
Jupiter in the 7th.
Jupiter.
Yeah.
In 1850, he became poet laureate and he married. See the 1-7 relationship between Jupiter in both the birth chart and in the Vamsha. Now, I want to come back to something that I forgot to mention when we were discussing how Jupiter makes him poet laureate. And it relates to his authorship as well. Some of you have heard me say, if you've read my articles, that I pay attention to planets in Kendra relationship to each other, particularly if in close Kendra relationship to each other. So focus in on Jupiter again, and what do you find as being in close Kendra relationship to
Mercury.
Very close Kendra relationship, right? And the sun's not in close Kendra relation, but it's still angular, from Jupiter here. And I believe this contributes to the kind of results that you saw the Jupiter major period bring as well. So just stating that fact. But now, what in the Jupiter major period, or what static potential in this chart shows a particular tragedy as well? What static potential in this chart shows a particular potential
child loss or no child?
Yeah, child loss. It forms a.
It's the curse of the serpents.
Yes.
You folks are pretty good Jyotishis. You recognize the curse of serpents company, but what modifies it? What modifies it?
The aspect of Jupiter.
What else?
The 5th Lord Venus in the Lagna.
In the Lagna.
Correct. So he and his wife had 2 sons, and but the second son died, which caused him enormous grief, very great sadness. In fact, let's go on another angle here. We talked about this good thing about the moon. It's in its exaltation sign. It goes Swakshetra in the Vamsha. It's got this benefic hemming. It's involved in this Shubha Duradhara Yoga, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's the other side of this moon?
It has
Very
the
dark
affliction
moon.
of both malefics.
Dark moon, and go ahead. Did I hear you, Roberto?
Yeah, it's got the affliction of both malefics, Mars and Saturn.
Focus in particular on Saturn here, but Mars too. T.S. Eliot, another famous British poet, referred to Arthur Lord Tennyson as the poet of sadness. If you read some of his poems and read a lot of his large poems, there's a tremendously melancholic strain that runs through them. As I heard another person said, he did sorrow really well in terms of being able to express and describe that emotional state. And you see the reflection of that here in this additional condition of this moon, particularly the strong aspect. You got the mutual glance with Saturn, and it's in Mars's nakshatra aspected by Mars, and see the connection there to the emotional grief over the loss of a child. But now coming to our main theme here, and this is one of the reasons that I'm showing you this chart, is that if you glance down at that table showing the dignities of Jupiter, and this is showing them in the Dasha Varga scheme, folks, Dasha Varga scheme, as you can say, you can see that, Jupiter, obtains 3 good divisions, but otherwise, pretty unremarkable, right? Pretty unremarkable. And then if I showed you this more in graphical form, you'll see it again. It's not terrible, but it's not, particularly that noteworthy either. Right? Not particularly that noteworthy. Now, who is noteworthy? Who is noteworthy?
The moon.
The moon. Remember, it's that second lord, which for a poet, pretty important, right? And then who else?
And Venus, I would say.
And Venus. More so in the Shad Varga and Sapta Varga, but still pretty healthy. Particularly still pretty healthy. It's getting more towards, but it's the moon here as the second lord here, that second lord of speech, that gets very pronounced as far as its strength. But Jupiter here is not that remarkable that way, which is why, when we say, when we start looking at Shadba, this is why I'm saying Vimshapaka Bala is not the whole story. It's not the complete story. You can't just go by it alone. This man was hugely famous. Poet laureates during that time, during the Victoria era, and of course the British Empire was at its absolute height at that time, and Tennyson was, extremely famous. He used to have a problem. He was, people. It was like, the downside of being a celebrity. People would, even on an island that he lived on, they would get there and they would try to peer in his windows to get a glimpse of him. During this time, he was a very, very famous individual, favorite of the queens, Queen Victoria, and so Jupiter's giving a very strong result here, is my point. And where's its source of strength? It's not real evident in. It's in the sign of a friend, but it's a temporary relation. The temporary relationship is not good. You see my point? But we'll come back to this chart for another reason, a different time. Okay, so coming now to another chart. And again, they shall remain a mystery man for the moment. But notable features, what strikes you about this chart?
Mark, did you do this on purpose? That you didn't want to show the North Indian style chart?
Wow. I didn't do it on purpose, but I've done it, haven't I? Have I done? Oh, I did it in all these. Oh, I'm going to have to pull up this chart. Sorry. Sorry. So I'm going to have to pull up this chart. Thank you for pointing this out. Okay. And now I'll get the chart you want up there. And I need degrees. And I'm going to have to collapse this. Okay, it's coming up here. Do you see a chart here in the North Indian style, yes?
Yeah.
And let me get the Navamsha, also in the North Indian style. And now, are you happy, Rohit?
Yes, thank you, Mark.
You're very welcome. It wasn't a subtle hint that everybody should start adopting the South Indian style. I'm going to get Dasha's sequence up here too. We're looking at this chart from the Farashri point of view. Okay. All right. So now, distinctive features.
Arishta. Severe Arishta.
Talk about that.
The Lagna Lord goes to the 8th aspect, a conjunct a malefic, and it's the Lagna itself is aspected by on the Rahu Ketu axis and aspected by another malefic, Saturn. So
there is Arishta Yoga here. Yes, that kind of Arishta, right?
Yeah.
There is, and okay, that could be considered a distinctive feature here, no question. What else?
A very bright and dignified moon.
Very
Almost
bright,
completely full.
You can hardly get a brighter or better moon than this, right?
Yep.
It's
Still waxing.
Still waxing. Hours from complete fullness, Purnima, and it's Lakshetra.
and involved in a Gauri Yoga.
Well, it gets the strong aspect of Jupiter, which is a favorable thing. But would it be Gauri Yoga?
It's not, but it's quasi Gauri Yoga.
Quasi. Love it.
I love it, Rohit, and I don't disagree. What prevents it from being actually a Gauri Yoga as defined in the classic?
The moon
It's
is
not in a Kendra or a trine.
Or a trine. But still, it's, this moon couldn't be brighter. Swakshetra, aspected by a strong Jupiter. Is there any malefic influence?
Mars.
So it's got that. But so which house here is really getting lit up? Which house is just really Third house. Third house is just really getting lit up. Okay. Other distinguishing features.
Shubha Ubhayachari Yoga. I mean, there's Mars there, but then, I mean, both, it's still a...
I'll go with it. It's true. It's not a pure Shubha Yoga, but there are natural benefics on both sides of the sun. So yes. What else?
Mark, would this be a Chandrati yoga with sun giving the moon the full brightness?
What prevents it from being Chandrati yoga? What has to happen? What is the definition that has to be there for Chandrati yoga? you've got Mercury in the 6th from the moon, and Venus in the 6th from the moon, and you've got Mercury from the 8th. But who's missing here to make it Chandrata Yoga?
Jupiter.
Jupiter would have to fall 6, 7, or 8. It falls 9th. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
But well, I guess we've said it already. There's nice, strong Swakshetra Jupiter here, 11th Lord in the 11th house, and then anybody notice anything about Saturn here?
Because
What?
it's
What?
the Yoga Karaka and aspecting the Lagna.
It's the Yoga Karaka, but does it have any source of strength?
Directional strength.
Has Dick Bala. What else?
Yeah, it's in its own house in Naramsha.
Goes to its moon Trikona sign in Naramsha. And are any yogas being formed here?
Just the fact that the 9th Lord in the 7th is a Raja Yoga.
It's 9th Lord in the trine Lord in the Angle house gives Raja Yoga. What else?
Dan Yoga from Jupiter.
Well, what enhances this? I mean, it's the Yoga Karaka planet. It's the 9th Lord in the 7th. We have seen that it has both directional strength and has a strong dignity in the Vamsha. What we're qualifying the yoga. What favorably additionally enhances
Aspect
Jupiter.
aspect of Jupiter, right? And then what about its relationship with the nodes here? What, as far as yogas go, at least then?
Well, because of Rahu and Jupiter being Saturn being the 9th Lord, aspecting onto Rahu and Ketu, who are both in the Kendra, both those nodes become Raj Yoga Karakas.
Right. There's nodal Raja Yogas here, folks. Nodal Raja Yogas, meaning Raja Yogas formed by the nodes that happen when they fall in angle houses and are with a trine lord, or when they fall in trine houses and are with an angle lord. That's what we have here.
And plus they're exalted.
Right. So this has this interesting chart, has some interesting features to it. Now, you've got Mercury, the 5th Lord, in the 9th house. And you've got Jupiter, Swakshetra. And you've got an extremely powerful 3rd house, 3rd Lord, that also has the aspect of Jupiter. Does anything strike you about that as far as something that might, some activity that might be
Writing.
Very good, Rohit. Why?
Jupiter and Mercury are the planets for writing, and the 3rd house and the 5th house are the houses to be seen. Jupiter aspects onto the 5th house. The 5th Lord, Mercury, goes to the 10th. And, the 3rd house, again, we have already spoken about it. So, you put everything together, you get a picture for a person who could write pretty good.
Rohit, pretty soon there's not going to be anything I have left to teach you. You're becoming very good. This is good. This is a prolific writer. And, many of you, unless you live in the U.S. and you're a Catholic, you may not. This is a man called Andrew Greeley, who was a Catholic priest, university professor, and a prolific writer who wrote an enormous amount. He wrote for the New York Times. He wrote for the Chicago newspapers. So that was that journalistic writing. Think about the 3rd house, right? But then he wrote novels, fiction, that were very, very successful, that always featured priests, usually priests engaged in bad behavior. His first very successful fictional work was a book called, published in 1981, called Cardinal Sins, that was all about this, cardinal who was carrying on this affair anyway, and embezzling church funds and so on and so forth. One of the points I want to make about this is that Jupiter's strength is obvious, right? Jupiter's strength is obvious here. But now, let me get this document back up here. It doesn't have the North Indian style chart. But you're not going to need it right now, because what I want you to have you look at, I want you to see the Vimshopaka Bala of Mercury. Do you see? Now, what's Mercury's dignity in the birth chart? Can anybody tell me? So, what kind of planet is Saturn to Mercury in terms of natural relationship?
The friends.
Are they? Are they? Who's the Mula Trikona sign of Mercury?
Saturn and Venus.
Who's the Mula Trikona sign of Mercury?
Virgo.
And from there, which houses does Saturn rule?
It rules the fourth and the fifth.
Fourth and the fifth from Virgo, Saturn?
No, 2, 6, 10. No, it rules the
Fifth and sixth.
fifth and sixth, sorry.
So what does it become in terms of its natural relationship? It becomes a neutral. How many signs away is Saturn here from Mercury in the birth chart?
10.
Well, yeah, if it's a temporary friend because it's 4 signs away. You can go either way. So, folks, as you can see from this table here, it would be a fall in the sign of a friend, but if it wasn't a temporary friend, in other words, its dignity is okay, but, it's just not that remarkable. And Mercury's condition in Vamsha is also that of a friend. But now when you look at in other divisions and you combine them in terms of the ones, again, that are most important, you'll see a very, very great strength. Mercury is the 5th lord in the 10th. Sign of the author. And where does Mercury get its strength, though? It's okay. You could see that it has a decent dignity, both in the birth chart and the Vamsha, but if you didn't see the Vimshopaka Bala here, you wouldn't see how really quite strong it is. Right?
Right.
Questions about that? Which was my main point about, wanting to talk about and show this chart. Now, let's see, did I do the same problem with, just to tell you about this man's level of prolificness, he joked that he never had an unpublished thought. And he once said that he wrote an average of 5,000 words per day. And used to joke, why should I practice contraception on my ideas? He also wrote very explicitly about sexual matters, which you can see here. One organization said he had the dirtiest mind ever ordained. And you can see in his chart here, if I bring it up, let's see. Well, you'd have to see it. He has that Mars Mercury. Let me bring it up this way. He has that the Lagna Lord, Venus, goes to the 8th house with Mars. So kind of an interesting chart from that standpoint. It wasn't playing itself out literally, not that I'm aware of. It was playing itself out more in terms of his characters in his books. Oftentimes were priests that were having a lot of sex. Kind of an interesting thing to see. Now, I mentioned that his first major fictional work for which he got famous was this book called Cardinal Sins, right? And it was published in the major period of the moon, sub-period of the sun. But now see his Nalamsha when I bring it up here. Do you see it here? No, where is it? Where is it? Folks, I'm a little disorganized here today. I thought I had this right, but I don't. So I don't have the Dashamsha here. Anyway, Dashamsha is along the 1-7 axis of the birth chart with the sun, I believe, in its exaltation sign. So we'll just go on here to this next chart, and I have to pull it up again because I didn't get the North Indian style here. So let me do that. And I won't let this woman be a mystery. At first, I'll just tell you who it is. Everybody know who Barbara Walters is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very famous television broadcast journalist, right?
Yep.
And I've used her chart, and when we've been, I used her chart in that article, The Icarus Factor, which was also dealing with planetary war, because you'll see that her Lagna and 10th Lord Mercury at 028 of Libra is within less than a degree of Mars, actually in a different sign at 2940 of Virgo. But what do you notice about both of these planets based on that placement?
They're both Vargotama.
Yes, they're both Vargotama. And based on the brightness magnitude measure, I believe Mercury is the winner of the war here, but still these planets gave their results strongly. What house is the house of journalism, particularly broadcast? Well, journalism of all kinds, but broadcast journalism as well. Anybody tell me? Third house. You'll see this is a conjunction of the first lord and the, I mean, again, it's not a conjunction by sign, but they're very conjunct, very close. You have to see conjunctions also by celestial longitude. So you have the first and 10th lord Mercury here, Vargotama, conjunct the third lord of journalism, Mars, also Vargotama as well. Right? And then, you know, one thing about Barbara Walters, she was known in particular for her very famous interviews with people. And one of those interviews was with Monica Lewinsky at the height of the whole White House scandal involving her and President Clinton, that 74 million people watched. It was the most, from that measure, it was the most watched news event in history. And this took place in her Mercury Mahadasha. Now again, seeing Mercury's strength here, as far as being Vargotama, that's easy. But what is its dignity here also, in addition to being Vargotama, what would you consider to be its dignity? Planetary dignity. What would be its dignity, folks? You do not be able to determine dignity here. Who is Venus a friend of Mercury or an enemy?
Friend.
It's a friend.
And, you know, is it a temporary friend or temporary enemy? You don't know these things. Okay.
It's a temporary friend.
It's a temporary friend. So it's compound relationship in this chart is?
It's a great friend.
Right. So we've seen it, it's Vargotama. Now what's happening in Navamsha?
They're 1-9 from each other.
Well, just 1-9, Peter? Something else happening here?
It's an exchange.
In an exchange.
Oh, it's an exchange, yes.
They're in exchange. Now we're starting to see the power of this Mercury. I mean, this woman really broke the glass ceiling. You know, women being broadcast journalists, especially news anchors or appearing in major news programs, was not heard of in her day and age. She kind of broke that glass ceiling and really had quite a stellar career, even though she had something of a speech impediment, which is also, you know, quite remarkable for somebody to achieve in the area that she achieved. And now going back to my document here, you'll see that if I show you the Vimshapaka Bala of Mercury in particular, Mercury is when that major news event took place where she was interviewing Monica Lewinsky. What do we notice here? Mercury's quite strong, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Anything you start to get 14, 15, 16, 17, anything in that range, starts to become quite strong. And the reason is, if we look at Mercury here and where it's falling in Libra so many different times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and every one of those instances, based on where Venus is also in relationship to it, it's being in the sign of the great friend. Besides being Vargotama relative to all those divisions, which includes all the divisions that carry the most weight. Rashi, Drekana, Shastyamsha, and Nilamsha. Vargotama, it reminds me of Bill Clinton's Jupiter that I showed you in the article, but in that case, it's not in the sign of a friend or a great friend. So this is what I wanted you to see.
Wow.
All right. So actually, folks, that's it for today in terms of illustrations. So let's just throw it open now to any general questions about anything you may have read in the article or what I'm trying to convey here as to how you utilize this or anything we talked about today as far as examples.
Mark, could we use this the tables of strength for for major transits of, say, Saturn and Jupiter? Would that be a valid thing to do?
I'm not. I mean, see in that transit condition to see what their Vimshapaka Bala is. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. For example, if Saturn, Saturn has in Dasabala has a strength of, say, 17.
We're talking at natally? You mean natally?
Natally. Could we then say that this particular Saturn is strong, so that when it's transiting a particular point, it carries that strength with it?
To my knowledge, good qualification. To my knowledge, that wouldn't be something that is a part of the Jyotish tradition. As you may be aware, what we'd be doing with that transit is seeing the Ashtaka Varga.
Right. Yeah.
If we're trying to gauge the strength of that planet.
Okay.
But in any kind of static potential analysis and any kind of dasha analysis, dynamic analysis, to see a Saturn having that level of strength, we'll just know that it's going to give its results very strongly, whatever those results are.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the way I would have you think about that.
Thank you, Mark.
What else?
I just wanted to find out if there's very contradicting, so to speak, analysis of planets. Like, one is just from a stationary point of view, one is in, one does not have any great dignity or anything in Navamsha and in the D1 chart, but in the Vimshapaka in the Dashvarga scheme, it's really powerful. How do you interpret that planet? Like, how would you say that,
Well, again, you might be confusing condition and or strength versus influence. If the planet is strong, again, that's and it has sources of strength, then that's an indication of its ability to give its effect stronger, whatever those are. But if it's in a dushtana, say it's the fifth lord in a dushtana under the influence of natural malefics, okay. In terms of what it's going to give as far as experience related to the fifth house, that's a bad Pamara yoga, as you know. All right. And just the fact that it's strong, is not going to change that.
Okay.
Unless, again, there's a relief from the influence of natural benefics that help modify that. But when you run that period, those fifth house indications are going to give the results strongly, whatever they are.
Okay. All right.
And this is a huge source of confusion in Jyotish, and I have to acknowledge it was for me for a long time. Strength does not mean favorableness. It can, right? But it's not by itself going to indicate favorableness. Now, if that planet that you're talking about is also involved in good yogas, et cetera, and there's a supportive promise in say certain divisional charts, whatever they may be, that's when you see the dramatic effects. what's always interested me is, this idea of why certain planets are giving certain, yogas, for example, why you see a Raja Yoga in one person's chart that makes him president of the United States, and, the Raja Yoga that makes my mother the president of her bridge club.
Right.
It's a different kind of. They're both making them president, but then the level of status is like one end of the spectrum to the other. And how do you see that astrologically? That's the thing that's always been a focus of my research.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to conclude now. So we'll just say our Sanskrit prayer, but stay tuned for part 2, which actually should be coming out fairly soon, where we're going to look at another piece of the puzzle that's even more complex, and that is Shadbala. Okay. And how to use that or not. Om Asato Masa Gamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamaya Mityor Ma Mutam Gamaya Sarvesham Swasti Bhavatu Sarvesham Shanti Bhavatu Sarvesham Punam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everyone. Namaste.
Namaste, Mark.
Thank you.